Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Q2 webinars educational series, Investing in Your Energy Future. My name is Tim Powers. I'm a Research and Policy Associate here with Inovateus. I'll be the host and moderator today of our webinar conversation, Brownfields, More Like Brightfields, covering the finer points of solar development on brownfield sites today. Our panelists are Melody Callender and Jordan Cobley. Jordan, Melody, can you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves, please?
Sure. My name is Melody Callender. I'm a senior project sales engineer and application engineer with Inovateus.
My name is Jordan Cobley, business development manager with Inovateus.
Thank you, guys. So for those who don't know, Inovateus is a Midwest leader in solar development and construction. To date, we've built about 400 megawatts across a couple dozen states, as well as the Caribbean. Today, we're going to be focusing on some of our projects, but also the larger sphere of brownfield development. Jordan and Melody are have worked in the brownfield space in a few facets, as well as the rest of the company has touched on that in the past, and we'll be looking at some of the finer points today around how we can urge brownfield owners to work with solar companies to utilize those brownfield spaces for what's called Brightfield development. Here's a bit more information on our company. Like I said, we've built 400 megawatts. That's about the size of a small coal plant in the last decade. We're looking to do another 100 megawatts in the next few years here. And some of those will be on brownfield sites, so we're very excited about that coming up here in the near future. So Melody, to kick things off for us, could you explain what a brownfield is, as well as a Brightfield, and what the difference there is?
Sure. So brownfield is a property with the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence of potential hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants. It's estimated that there are about 450,000 brownfields in the U.S. That are in various stages of cleanup and capping. These properties are basically rendered unusable given the toxicity and problems that they do pose and hold for future development. And then pretty much the opposite, a Brightfield. It's a field that has been converted and uses solar panel to produce electricity. Brightfields can be installed on many different types of land, including brownfields. So when they're installed on brownfields, the equipment can be anchored by penetration of the ground, or they can also be a ballasted system that actually sits up on the ground and is held in place by a blocking system. These systems can be installed to provide electricity to the local power grid, or in some cases directly to an end user, such as like a factory or a manufacturing plant. So obviously the difference is brownfield unusable, Brightfield usable. The EPA actually says that it's one of their major driving forces in potential uses for any brownfield that's capped and cleaned up is for renewable energy, specifically solar, because solar fits the footprint of what a brownfield is a little bit better than wind or any other type of renewable.
Interesting. So you mentioned there's almost 500,000 brownfields around the country, a vast majority of which have the EPA manages in some form or respect. Here in Indiana and the upper Midwest, we're located in what's called Region 5 of the Brownfield Management Program. For brownfield owners out there, could you cover a few of the criteria that a solar development group would look for if they're looking for an ideal or optimal brownfield for solar development?
Sure. Some of the major components that go to making a brownfield a good candidate for solar are going to be within that they are already rolling through the closure process that is capping or putting a layer of protection over the cap so that the development can happen. So if it's already in the process, it is already through the process and closed with the EPA. Other potential pluses for a brownfield in the use category is going to be anything close to electrical distribution, transmission, substations, those types of entities that are going to help with the offtake of the power. And then a lot of times we would look at what the cap is made of. If we are able to penetrate the cap, at least partially, it's an easier construction process than if we can't penetrate at all. So, it's not that we can't do either, it's just an easier process. And so those would probably be, we're going to pick this candidate first based on the ease of installation. Also, some of the other points that we might look at would be, vicinity of where it's at, where it's located. Is there high congestion or need on the grid? And then also some factors in how can you get to the site. So if it's off in the middle of kind of nowhere, it's harder to get to. Logistically, it's a little bit more difficult to actually get product there. So kind of we'll start with type A candidate first and then kind of work our way out as the pool of viable candidates shrinks.
Got it. You mentioned locations near substations, electrical facilities. What type of acreage would be the optimal range for the type of project that Inovateus or another solar developer might typically build on?
Well, brownfields in general, a lot of times it's not a huge site. So you're looking at anywhere from 5 to 20 megawatts is kind of like the sweet spot for what we're doing. Once you start getting into large scale, it makes it a lot more of a difficult process to manage, given that you probably will at some portion of the project be using ballast of some faction. Where you might be able to penetrate some of the cap, part of the cap you may not. And that kind of leads to a project that we've done that was available on. So we did a little bit of both, but I'll let Jordan talk about that.
Got it. And just for reference, 1 megawatt is typically takes up about 5 acres of land when we were building these kinds of projects. Mel, the last question to you. When a brownfield is, brought to the government or the EPA, how does the EPA track and manage those systems until they're ready to be developed on?
Well, I mean, there's really no one really tracks them or manages the inventory. Obviously, the EPA is the company that or the entity that works on making sure that closures happen under a specific set of guidelines that are in fact at a federal level. But there is no one entity that actually tracks and keeps inventory. The EPA would just be the oversight for the actual brownfield / Superfund site.
Okay. Yeah, just for folks listening, in some cases, brownfield owners can have a brownfield and not even realize it if they haven't had the proper studies done. And it is important to remember that, those need to be completed before site work can begin in some cases. Moving over to Jordan on our talk here. Jordan, could you explain a little more about what kind of incentives exist both from the federal and or the state level for brownfield development and brownfield owners?
Sure thing. Federal grants are all available on the EPA's website. If you search for brownfields on the EPA's website and then go under grants, they have them listed. Those grants can range from assessment grants, which provide funding to assess the site and create a plan for cleanup, to the actual cleanup grant itself and kind of everything in between. There's also a couple state-specific brownfield programs, depending on where you're located. I don't know of any solar-specific brownfield grants, but in 2020, solar is still eligible for the 26% tax credit, along with a host of other local, state, county, and utility incentives that are all fairly site-specific. So we'd be happy to help you figure that out and see which ones the potential brownfield you're looking at could qualify for.
Great. What about, so I guess moving on from there, what kind of when you're talking these specific site development initiatives and items, what are some environmental items that need to be pointed out or will be of concern when a developer like Inovateus is brought in for a brownfield site?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of potential issues that could be with the ground. One of the systems we've done was in an old steel plant. We've had all kinds of things in the ground. Some of them have wax, some of them have paint. So the EPA qualifies those brownfields. The environmental issues with the brownfields are typically in the soil, and there's some residual effect that is contaminating the local environment. Extra safety precautions and OSHA compliant practices are absolutely critical when working on a brownfield site. And Inovateus has an employee that is OSHA 40 and has WAPR certified. So we meet a lot of the safety requirements that the EPA would require for someone being on site.
Great. Would you mind just diving a little bit more into that, what that requirement is with OSHA and how that or what requirements are needed from a developer to operate on a brownfield site there?
Sure. It kind of varies site to site, but we're potentially looking at a site that has some radioactive material in the ground, and on that site in particular, portions of it are not capped, and because of that, they're requiring an OSHA 40 certification and HAZWAPR training, so that if there's an accident or something on site, the person in charge has the correct safety plan to take care of the employees working on site.
Thanks. So one big issue with brownfields is that they are a blight on the community, and a lot of cities and towns and owners, might see this as, a big burden. They can decrease property values. They can even have a negative impact on the economy in places where they're located. The EPA has estimated that property values can increase once brownfields are flipped and remediated. Property values can increase between 5 and 15% if they're located close to a brownfield, which is a very great incentive for communities to really look seriously at how these sites can be, or why these sites should be improved upon. And if they're looking to have community clean energy on site, all the more reason to take a look at solar energy for those sites. So Jordan, on the screen here, we've got our Inovateus Kokomo Solar 1 project, which we completed in 2016. Could you fill us in a little more on how that project was developed and the benefit to the community there?
Sure. Like Melody mentioned earlier, we had a project where we could pound posts, and that is this site, which is in Kokomo, Indiana, and the off-taker is Duke Energy, and they actually have a PPA with the city of Kokomo to sell them the power. But the city of Kokomo owned this site. It was an old steel plant, and one of the unique things about this system that we don't typically see is we were allowed to pound posts into the ground that would hold the solar up, the racking and the panels. But on this side, if you put anything in the ground, you were not allowed to bring it back out. And so if you had a refusal with a post, what we had to do was cut it off and put a concrete ballast block, kind of like a small, or I guess a rather large parking block, or a small, maybe median block that you'd see driving down the road in that area. And then that, provides the benefit of holding that part of the racking to the ground, and also provides the support for it to sit on top of. And we completed that project in 2016.
Yeah, this project was on the old Continental Steel site, which is in the bottom left corner here. That site sat abandoned for a couple decades before the EPA finally sank about $65 million into it, and turned this into one of the largest solar arrays in the state of Indiana, which Inovateus was awarded an award for from the EPA for. Well, moving on, Jordan, can you expand a little more on what the future looks like and how Inovateus can take a role with brownfield owners in the Midwest here?
Sure. Inovateus Solar is an EPC and a developer. So obviously we'll be building solar facilities on brownfields, and then also helping to develop those. Sometimes in the process of closing a brownfield site, the local EPA wants to know, what the future plans are for that. So we can be involved in creating designs to show them pictures of kind of what the plan is to put solar on it in the future.
Excellent. Well, yeah, to wrap up some of our items here, Inovateus is still continuing to work with brownfields across the Midwest. We're one of the most experienced in solar energy providers operating currently. We have a variety of finance groups which are very interested in brownfield development, which Jordan and Melody have both worked with pretty closely on some of our more keynote projects. Jordan, do you have any more closing comments here on how we could our operations are best suited for brownfield development?
Sure. If you're an owner of a brownfield site and are considering putting solar on it, one of the best things to do is just to give us a call. We can talk through some of your options. When siting solar projects, you always got to have the electrical infrastructure around the site to make sure it works, and that's a very quick qualifier we can use to see if you want to keep pursuing that option. So giving us a call, talking through the site, we'd be happy to do that, no charge, and to help you decide kind of what your options are.
Yeah, if you have a viable brownfield site, if you're a city or a municipality or even a county, Melody and Jordan would be the folks that we would send out for a site walk and could provide an assessment as to the viability of solar on that site. Well, yeah, that concludes our Brownfield to Brightfield's webinar here today. If you have questions or inquiries about brownfield development, feel free to contact some of our business development managers listed here. Melody and Jordan, thank you so much for joining us today. And we will be back again with our Q3 in a few months here. So guys, thank you so much. This has been really insightful today on this new area of solar development as the industry continues to grow. And we look forward to doing this again sometime soon.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.